At a party like this, a Percabeth High School Alternate Universe Fanfiction, Part 4. To say that Percy was shocked was, kind of an understatement. The blonde-haired girl in front of him, she didn't move a muscle. The shy smile was still locked onto her face. "I thought you were in California," Percy managed out. Annabeth bit her bottom lip and tucked some of her hair out of her face and behind her ears. "I was," she said simply. Percy didn't stop gaping. "You moved back?" he asked, shell-shocked. She laughed a little. "Well, I'm here now, aren't I?" she teased. Percy's sea-green eyes scanned over her. Not in a creepy stalker way, though he was sure it would be perceived as such, but more in a disbelief way. He couldn't believe his eyes. He felt like they were lying to him. He looked for any signs of that little girl he had once known. The hair was the same, and so were the eyes. And yes, she had been cute in a baby way before, but oh my god, it all looked so different now. Percy now understood her confusion when seeing him in a leather jacket. It was also a far cry from the kindergarten days. "You gonna say anything, Seaweed Brain?" Annabeth teased, calling back to the nickname she had given him as a kid when he dived into the oceans, ending up with a mass of seaweed on his head. The memory resurfacing made Percy smile fondly. "I can't believe it," he said, looking over her appearance again and again. She rolled her eyes at him. Probably because he was stating the obvious. "Wow, I didn't figure that out already," she said sarcastically. Percy's smile grew into a wide grin, thanks to the familiar wit that she had even as a child. "Of course you did, wise girl," Percy said. The nickname just rolled off his tongue smoothly, as if he had been saying it for months at this point, rather than years and years ago in his childhood. Annabeth laughed. Clearly, she liked the nostalgia too. "Just how did we find each other? At a party, no less?" she said with a slight shake of her head. Percy shrugged. "Beats me, but I'm glad it happened. I just can't believe that Thalia didn't tell me," Percy said, secretly bitter about his punk friend withholding such a big and important secret from him. Annabeth put a hand out as if to say, "Well, did you, ever ask her before tonight?" she asked, though the look on his face told her all she needed to know. Her lips quirked up in a smirk. "That's what I thought." The tone in her voice was victorious. Quickly, though, Annabeth began walking past Percy, again having him follow her blindly. "I feel like we should catch up, or something, on the past 5 or something years," Percy said in a slight daze. Annabeth laughed, the sound ringing across and around the empty maze. "I moved away 7 years ago. Did you stalk me for 2? She asked with an amused smile. Percy sputtered for an answer before his brain computed that she was just pulling his leg. "You are one cruel woman," the black-haired boy pointed, earning another twinkling laugh from the blonde. "So I've been told," she said with her hand on the car door handle. Percy unlocked the car with 2 clicks and she slipped inside. "But sure, we can catch up." Annabeth smiled up at him as he got into the driver's side. God, how did he not recognize her smile? It was so clearly and obviously hers. "So, when did you move back?" "Right before freshman year. Saw Thalia on the first day back, and well, we're friends again, right?" "Ah, And boy am I mad that she never told you that you were back. Why would she do that? I don't know. Maybe because I would want to know if my childhood best friend was back in town. Percy, it's Thalia. Touché. Annabeth leaned back in triumph. Clearly, she hadn't changed a bit. Still proud as ever to win and doing it often. Percy started up the car and deciding that he'd head home and pray that she wasn't the one driving her friends. She fiddled with the radio a bit before deciding that she didn't like any of the songs they were playing and elected to play music from her phone instead. Her blonde, still princess-looking curls bounced as she nodded her head to the music slightly. Maybe, just maybe, looking at Annabeth every 5 seconds and not the road was objectively unsafe. Knowing it was her and not a random stranger, Percy felt a little bit better about wanting to tell her that she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. Just slightly better, just the slightest bit. How was California? Percy asked. Annabeth hummed. It was fine. More your crowd than mine at first. Lots of people, lots of social gatherings. I end up mixing with a lot of different crowds, but apparently I adopted that classic Californian girl clothing look, Annabeth said with a slight laugh. Well, you didn't look punk, goth, or emo, so the next choice was like mainstream, Percy defended himself. I'll give you that, she admitted, but before he could revel in the victory, Annabeth spoke again. But do tell me, how did surfer and swimming Percy become punk rock and skater boy chic? Percy scoffed at her question. One, no one calls me skater boy chic, he corrected her. Annabeth rolled her eyes and looked to do a mock curtsy. Oh, my bad, she said, a voice full of sarcasm. Percy chuckled. 2, I started skateboarding and here we are, leather jacket and all. Annabeth looked at Percy one over again and hummed in what he guessed was approval. For the rest of the ride, they both stayed quiet, only humming along to the songs if they knew the melody. It was comfortable. As kids, they could never shut up around each other, but now, some 7 years later, they'd fallen back into a rhythm of banter and peace. Annabeth didn't seem surprised when Percy brought her back to his house, and since he hadn't ever moved, she knew where everything was without even a peep from him. Is your mom home? She asked, and Percy shook his head. No, some book club thing or whatever, he explained. The blonde opened her mouth in a silent, ah, makes sense. Percy nodded. At least we don't need to explain anything, she said with a slight smile. Percy nodded in agreement and flopped onto the couch, followed by Annabeth, who sat pristinely. You really haven't changed, Percy snickered. Annabeth rolled her eyes at him. It was now that Percy remembered that her eyes weren't some light blue, but that they were a steely, almost metallic gray. He recalled loving the color as a child, always wanting to find silver jewelry to match them. Are you just as loud and annoying as before? Annabeth asked with a raised brow. Percy grinned at her proudly. Yep. Annabeth shook her head but smiled fondly. Percy sat up a little straighter, though he was still slouching in comparison to her. So, what have you been doing at school to hide from me? He asked. Annabeth laughed slightly. Sure, my whole life revolves around you and staying away. No, I'm in debate. I usually win, of course. I moved up to teaching judo at a studio. It's on the east side, Annabeth said. Percy snorted. That sounds dangerous. How many best friends are going to get judo flipped by your students? He said pointedly, still vaguely feeling the pain of being slammed onto his back by a small blonde girl that he called his best friend. Annabeth smirked proudly at him. A lot. Anyways, I managed the girls' swim team and the water show. Percy's eyes widened in surprise. Why haven't I seen you then? He cried out. Annabeth shrugged. Percy, it's been 7 years. You probably have seen me and just not recognized who I was. I mean, I know I've seen you, but I just didn't know my seaweed brain would be clad in black and have a streak of blue in his hair. Though it actually makes sense now, Annabeth said nonchalantly. Percy's heart swelled in hearing her say, my seaweed brain. Right. I guess I just noticed today. Annabeth bit her lip, a sign that she was thinking, which she was doing all the time, so there was that. Speaking of which, aside from my clothes, why did you approach me? I know you're social, but you're also not the type to walk up to random strangers and start a conversation, she asked. Oh, well, okay, how could he explain that it was because he thought she was really pretty and he was just drawn to her? He drawled as she urged him to explain. I just thought you looked out of place. I don't know, Percy lied, averting his eyes. Annabeth raised a brow. Wow, you didn't mention that before. No, seriously though, what in the heck possessed you to come talk to me? Annabeth said with more sarcasm than water in the sea. I thought you looked really pretty, he admitted after a minute of Annabeth's piercing, stone-gray gaze. She looked slightly taken aback, but he swore he saw her cheeks flush pink. Well, you could have led with that, she said, quickly composing herself. It was now Percy's turn to roll his eyes and sass her. Oh yeah, 'cause going up to a stranger and saying, "Hi, you're the most beautiful person I've ever seen. How was your night is a totally good idea. Knowing you would have flipped me right then and there," Percy said. Clearly, he didn't even know what he was saying, but Annabeth sure did. She was speechless. Now her face was now clearly red and her eyes were everywhere but on him. And Percy, as oblivious as ever, was still confused as to what caused her change in demeanor. I wouldn't have flipped you if you said that, she managed out softly. Percy's mind did a backtrack, and suddenly, all the red emergency alarms rang out in his head. Really? He sputtered. Annabeth nodded slightly, for once having a shy smile on her face. I guess I'll say it then. You've somehow gotten even prettier since the last time I saw you, Percy said, now matching the color of his rug so well, which was fire engine red for the record. He was matching it so well that if he laid down face up, you'd lose his head in the threading. It was so red. Annabeth hid most of her face with her hands. You know, if it's anything to you, you've gotten attractive, Annabeth said, covering her entire face after her confession. Very attractive. Percy, she missed the now cocky smile on Percy's face. Really? Just now? He prodded at her, earning a laugh as she pushed his face away. Oh my God, shut up, she said in a loving manner, of course. Percy laughed and pulled her into a hug, though it was only a side one. I'm glad you're back, he said happily, feeling at home and at peace with her in his arms. Though they were just set loosely around her waist, She basically melted into his chest and almost snuggled in. "I'm happy to be back too," she said, her voice slightly muffled into his chest. They sat there for a while, listening to each other's breathing until they synced up and the slight whirring of the heater. Annabeth shifted and looked up at him, her eyes shining bright and almost like glittering silver. Using her hands, she moved up and kissed him softly on the cheek. Percy's entire face burnt up and a dopey smile spread across his face, and not even for a second did he think of disguising it. "Thanks for saying I'm pretty," she said shyly, looking down and wringing her hands. In a bout of courage, Percy lifted her head with his forefinger and pressed his lips against hers. She gave a small gasp, but accepted the kiss nonetheless. Her lips were soft and tasted like caramel. Percy never did feel like something was missing from his life, but it was probably because he didn't know what he was missing. Now, there was a new light in his world. Something had changed, and there was no way he could go back. He was in a whole new world with just him and Annabeth. That is until the door opened and his mom shouted at them for an explanation.